Awesome.
Okay, this is Phil McNally with Artist Art as part of Art Speak, and we have Marianne Van de Dusen, and we want to talk to her because she interests me. So I thought to say, hey, what the hell? Let's let's go give her a peep. And she volunteered and she came on board. So Marianne, we appreciate you being here. How you doing?
I'm great, Phil. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, we appreciate you being on board. I mean, this is great. Marianne, let people know that this Marianne I came across again as I do my research and stuff, and she just her art spoke so much to me, and I think it can help you guys out by what she has to offer, and we're going to get into her, and we'll find out all of these neat things. So, Marianne, as I normally start these, I start with a kind of a biography about scenario. So let's just give a kind of a summary of where you're from, where you're at, and
Sure.
what do you do?
Sure. So my name's Marianne. I live in Northern Ontario in a town called North Bay. And it's beautiful. And it's actually one of the main sources of my inspiration. I feel so fortunate because I paint where I live. And so I'm really drawn to flowers and landscapes and birds. And I first moved here about 10 years ago to pursue my degree in teaching. And
Mm,
while I was here, I was in the junior intermediate division, which requires teacher candidates to take all the subjects. So we have to learn how to
mm.
teach math and science and art. And so I got a paintbrush in my hand and we were working with like the kind of tempera paints that they provide in schools.
You brought attention to me um, in a lot of different ways, and not only is your art beautiful, I really think it's very good, but it there's something about the message that you brought across that I find that is not as, I guess, outstanding as other artists that I've interviewed bring across. And that is uh, two things. One is the acrylics, that you do use acrylics, and the other is time. And
Mhm.
we'll talk about time now because I think it's fascinating because I've talked to professional artists, I've talked to just other homebody artists, and though the professionals know it, the homebodies really don't. They come in, they let's give an example. They take a class and they learn a little bit about how colors work and how paint works and stuff, and they get at home and go to canvas and they bang 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 bang, and it's kind of done. Where the professionals, they are definitely more structured and more lengthy, and that's where I'm going, is that they're more lengthy in their process, and the homebodies really don't understand that some things, some paintings, the degree of how you're painting it and what you're painting can be a long drawn out process. It is not a 2 hour, tempera type of show. It's not one some that, hey, my kid brought home something and she did a really nice painting and it's so abstract, or it's so phenomenal that it only took her, 5-10 minutes. So that's the way painting should be, 5-10 minutes. Okay, da 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 da, did that. Or I want to go out and I paint a landscape and I do a cow, and then the cow comes out and it's, oh, this, I don't like the cow very much, and I'm sitting here hours on hours on getting the cow to look correct.
Mhm.
So it's a thing that I believe is part of what I have interviewed these artists for, that their technique, that their process, but more or less that it is not as well said that all of these things take time. So something that looks like I saw on an Instagram video that was, 30 seconds long, now I see it as, when I do it for real, oh my gosh, this has taken me 2 days, and
Yeah.
then, oh, maybe 3 days, and it's still not done.
Yeah.
Um, you have a video out there. If everybody's curious, I will put her information on this site, my site, as far as her videos. That one painting took you 15 hours, I believe.
Yeah. And it was a small painting too. It was only like a 12 by 16. And that
Amazing.
doesn't include the canvas prep. That doesn't include the drawing. That's just brush to canvas. And I
So you,
consider that fast.
yeah, so 15 hours. So
Yeah.
now let me ask you something from the point of somebody hearing that. I mean, is it 15 hours of nothing but sitting through the whole thing, or is it a broke up of 15 hours? I've done it 4 hours this day, 4 hours
Yeah.
this day. Yeah.
Oh, I have to break it up just because I'm a mom, I've got young kids, and so basically, and I also try and maintain a healthy, active lifestyle, so I have to work that in.
Mhm.
But that painting, yes, it took 15 hours, but it was over the course of, I think, about 6 days
Mhm.
of painting sessions, just because of how it was logistically. Like the week was kind of broken up.
Right.
And so I had errands to run, doctor's appointments to take the kids to, things like that. So yeah, no, very much broken up.
And this is kind of what I'm seeing with art too. In fact, my own art that I'm doing is that if I want anything good, it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
Period. I mean, I can't sit there now. Again, there are people and there are painters that could go out there and do something. And in fact, I had interviewed Ian Roberts, and he's a masterpiece of composition. Um, he actually did a painting, and we talked about it, and it was done fairly quickly, but it was a beautiful painting. And I
Mm.
said, well, how did you get that done so quick? And I was looking at certain pieces of the painting and going into certain parts of it and say, well, how'd you do that? How'd you do that? How'd you get that color? How'd you get that mix?
Mhm.
How'd you get? And he says, so part of it he could tell me, other parts said, I have no idea. I have
He was in the zone.
he would exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, and that's kind of where I'm kind of going here with the time scenario is that in order to get the piece done, I mean, you already said that your was it 12 by 16? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that
So it's about that big.
right. So you saying that took just to paint 15 hours, but you
Yes.
didn't talk about the prep. You didn't talk about
Yes.
everything else that you get into. So there's even more time
Oh, yeah.
addended to that,
Yeah.
that people have got to understand that once you start a project of an art piece and you want to paint flowers or florals or landscapes or whatever, you've got to take so much in consideration that there's first off, you've got to take, there's going to be time invested. And if it goes 15 hours, if it goes 30 hours, if it goes sometimes I've heard artists say it took me a year
Oh, yeah.
to
I've
get
had longer, like the big works
right.
probably take me a few months at
Right.
least.
Right. They've got to understand that's what comes with it. And we're not even going to get into the part yet about what you talked about on some of your videos about learning from your mistakes,
Oh, yeah.
because you will make mistakes, and that will be something that you've got to also consider, that you've got to make sure that when the way I look at it, don't you have to for me, it's like, you now that I'm a better artist, I used to make a lot of mistakes and I didn't know they were mistakes until later on. And then I found out that I make mistakes now, recognizing early on this is a mistake.
Yeah.
And then it's correction of that mistake. Because if I continue on with that mistake, it's going to do just addendum all these other mistakes that I'm going to be getting to where I'm losing it. I'm just losing it. And
Yeah.
you feel the same way about that you get into?
Yeah. Yeah. And so like with the mistakes, um, I always feel like every painting is a learning opportunity, and with every learning opportunity, there's always that wall that you hit
Mm-hmm.
where you're like, shoot, I've never done this before. Uh,
Right, I remember that.
so I've never worked with this color before. I've never had to paint, fur or insert whatever here. I've never had to paint a stormy waterscape before. How do I go about breaking this down? How can I use past experience to sort of inform what might be the best way forward, but might also not be? I do primarily work from photos as opposed to life. And so the first thing that I do once I get the reference photo is to figure out the size of canvas I'll be using and the aspect ratio of it so that I can figure out the composition, usually in Lightroom first. And even that takes some time to try and figure out, okay, like, do I want this to be a 1-to-1 ratio? What's the best composition just through cropping this image alone that will, I think, result in a successful painting. And then as well, while I have it in Lightroom, I also make some further adjustments that I think will support it to become more painterly, because something that has taken me some time to learn, but I feel like I'm kind of in the groove with it now, is
Mhm.
recognizing that a photo is not a painting.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
when we get these reference photos, the shadows are often just flat and they're black, and there's
Mhm.
so little we can do with them because depending on
Mhm.
how the camera was exposed, and good photographers expose for the highlights, which often means that the darker sections of the image are just blacked out essentially, right? And then you
Right.
lose all this
Right.
information. And so when you go to translate that into a painting, if I don't do some work with the reference photo to figure out, okay, what's going on with these shadows? Are they warm or cool? Do I see any lights bouncing in here? What are these forms that I'm seeing? Are
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
relevant? Do they
Mhm.
actually support this composition? And so basically, I do some work with that before I do some preliminary sketches, and then I get it onto my canvas. I usually use a grid
Right.
to do my transfers. And once it's all up there, and that's when I can begin the painting process. But I always work on a toned canvas, and that's another thing to take into consideration with your time.
Mhm.
Just doing that layer of gesso. I typically use yellow ochre liquid acrylic to tone my gesso. And so I always apply that, sand it down, and I always paint the edges black too. So that's additional time considerations. So if
Right.
we're talking about this theme of time, if we look at from the moment I get the reference photo to the edits to making sure I print it off, because I always work with hard copy prints.
Mm.
I know a lot of artists use iPads, and I think that's amazing. I've found that for me personally, the luminance messes with my ability to
Right.
read
Right.
color because the
Right.
color comes through so much brighter on a screen.
Correct.
So my
Correct.
values are off.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I always print them off at Staples. It costs like $2 Canadian to do
Mhm.
that. So I always get these nice 11 by 17 color prints from Staples. And then once that's done, I have to do my canvas prep. Once the canvas is prepped, then I have to do my drawing. I like to paint the edges black first. And then I start painting. But that whole prep process probably takes anywhere from between 3 to 5 hours.
Now, 3 to 5 hours for your professionalism. Now, from somebody who's just coming in
Yeah,
on this, it may take a lot longer as
true.
far as going through. And then there'll probably be the mistakes of learning, and that's kind of what I want to get into. But
Yeah.
you bring up a point that I have recently come into being with my journey of art, and that is the iPad scenario.
Yes.
I've used I don't have an iPad, but I know people who do, and they put their stuff on it. And I'm people who know me, I know I'm a tech, so I've been in a lot of technology and a lot know about computers and monitors and all this other kind of graphic stuff. So my deal is that as far as what I'm learning is that there's when you look at it from a monitor side, either Photoshop or through an iPad or whatever, you've got additive color. And the additive color is just color that I'm finding out and learning that pigment, oil pigment, will not match. You
Yeah.
will find a certain degree of value that you will not ever get. And this is the problem that I have had for many, many years that I would take would you explain your process so well, but I have seen and I have done take a photo reference and copy the damn thing onto a painting. And it's like, this does not work.
Yeah.
Just it's not there. Now,
Yeah.
somebody could go into a museum or a gallery and see art and say, "Oh, this is what he used 3 colors, and it's just a ball and a square or something like that, and it looks like it's off of a photo," and it may be, but the time involved to prep this to the point where it would look photo-ish on a canvas is not copying the photo
That's right.
to the canvas.
Yeah.
It is what you got through saying, which is a prep of sketching, of composition, what belongs there, what doesn't belong there, how it can be positioned, the size of the canvas, the tone of the canvas. Then, because once you put the color on, there we go. We're starting to do more of what it would look like on a canvas. And
That's
I'm
right.
finding out that going through, I've gone through several other artists through color wheels and charts, which I do use and I believe in, but there's a difference between what you see on a photo and what you see on a canvas and how you interpret that. And there is no, again, I'm a technician, there is no app, guys, out there that does this correct, because I've researched this. There is no
Yeah.
app that can take a photo and make it into a canvas and say this is, and then on top of that, these are the pigments, these are the oils, or these are the acrylic colors that you use. Now,
Yeah.
Golden does something similar to that and actually does an interpretation of an image and what colors to use. But I've not gone
Oh,
through and actually tried
I
to
did not
do
know
it.
that.
Yeah,
That's cool.
they've people. In other words, it's kind of like AI. People are trying to make it happen, but it's not quite there yet. So I,
Yeah.
I think it will eventually get there. But as far as something that you see physically in front of you and
Yeah.
what you see on a monitor, um, I think some people have talked about the Munsell
Yes.
color
Yeah. Yeah.
wheel, and
Yeah.
it goes into which is what I've come across in my local and latest things, is that I have found that, especially through Photoshop, I found that you can find a value, but it's the saturation.
Yeah.
It is the degree that it is dulled. It is the degree that it is vivid. It is the degree and there is in these types of apps such as Photoshop or
Yeah.
Mansell, is that they do actually take it to that level, saying you need to be
Yeah.
right here. This is it. And the problem with being right here, when you need to be right here for a 15-hour painting or a 50-hour painting or however long it takes, you've got to keep coming up with that same pigment, that same value, that same saturation, that same hue in order to make it happen.
Yeah.
And I do not see that ever happening across my palette, because it'll either dry up, or I've got to remix it again, or I've got to put something else in it just to get it to that percentage that I can find on a Photoshop filter, a color filter, or a certain
Mhm.
color wheel, and can't. But I am finding out certain techniques and ways of getting there a little bit more rapidly.
Mhm.
But somebody told me, a painter, Bill Inman, says painting, like I said, when you look at it on a monitor and you look at it as a pigment color, you there are two different variations of that. It's sort of, you're losing something. And he basically says there is a problem with using oils. There's a problem with using acrylics on a canvas when you're trying to do a reference photo off of a monitor. Because a monitor will give you the depth and the breadth of that color to wherever it absolutely needs to be. But
Yeah.
mixing it, you'll never get it. You will
Yeah.
never ever get it.
Yeah.
And let's say, so how do you get close? Okay, there's different ways. So I think the timing here is kind of an interesting subject matter, because all of this prep that you're talking about, the sketching and the tonal and then the composition, and then putting the color in to where it is not, like you said, photographs are made by highlights, and the highlights are the ones that are accented and the shadows are missed. The shadows actually are usually in painting the first things you put down. You put down the darks, you put down the dark shapes, you get
Mhm.
those in first, and then you build around those to a medium, to a highlight, to everything else, and you get
Mhm.
that happen. But if you don't have those darks, especially when you're doing a value scale color on the shadows, I mean, you miss that portion of it. Or
Yeah.
you lay one down. You say, okay, I'm at this value on this color for a shadow, and then I got a saturation level of this on it. But if you get that wrong, every other shadow is gonna be grown from that, and you've already made your mistake with the
Yeah.
color, and it kind
Yeah.
of throws out. You see where I'm going?
Yeah. 100%. Like when I think back to some of my first works and I was provided with a photograph and asked to paint it, I would paint the photograph. And I'm thinking specifically of a work that involved a sunset. And what happens when you shoot a sunset? The horizon line is blackened.
Mhm.
And so that's what I painted. And when I look at it now, it looks so flat and
Right,
lifeless to me
right.
because I think often when people say things like, oh my gosh, your painting looks like a photo, they don't actually mean that. And here's what I mean by this is that, the train painting, for example, the one
Hmm.
that I said took about 15 hours. When people say it looks like a photo, I'm cheating with their eyes a little bit because,
Right.
and I'll talk about rendering here. Um, with the trees in the background, if I were to make it just like the photo, every single branch would be perceptible. And if you're using that little color drop picker that you use in Photoshop, the one that you're describing, the one where you can isolate colors, not only would every single branch be visible, but it would
Mm.
actually be an exceptionally dark value. And
Right.
so if I were to trust that photograph and basically try and copy that photograph
Mhm.
exactly as it was on my monitor, I would have incredibly sharp, thin lines mimicking these tiny, tiny little branches of trees, and they would be a very dark value. And that is scientifically what my computer screen is showing me. And I know this because I'm using the little dropper to
Right.
detect.
Right.
And when you zoom in, you can see on the very low pixels, like the sharpness of these lines. They're
Mm.
very sharp. So when I put those in, I blurred them and I used a fluffy round brush that had no definition to it whatsoever, wet into wet, in order to sort of insinuate that there were some taller trees there in the background. And I just kind of flicked it up. I did not put much time into it at all. And people are saying that looks like a photo. I think what they mean is that it looks like how you see things in real life. And we sort of think that a photo is how we perceive things in real life. And we
Mm.
sort of conflate the two. But a camera sees things completely differently than humans because a camera is able to render every single detail
Every single
into
thing.
sharp focus. Whereas the human eye, we sort of like our vision catches on things, right? So if
Hmm.
I'm focused on this lens, I have a general gist of the room behind me. I can see sort of the outline here, shape there. But because I'm focused on you right now, those are just kind of blurred.
Right.
And so I think that, often with realism and something that I'm learning and aspiring to get better towards is actually making those distinctions of what really matters here in terms
Hmm.
of where I pull the eye. And
Hmm.
so when people say that looks like a photo, I appreciate it and I'm not going to correct them. But I think that more what they mean is that looks how I might see it if I were to be there in person. And that's where I think paintings actually have the ability to be a little bit more of like a living, breathing document because they can better
Hmm.
mimic the human interpretation of that same moment than a camera, which freezes every
Everything.
single,
Right.
yeah. Our reference photos are taken in passing, and the
Hmm.
reference photos are taken without necessarily as much thought to composition. Like the pros, the real
Hmm.
photographers
Hmm.
do this.
Hmm.
But for someone like me, I'm just snapping a shot or someone wants
Right.
to, something like that. You don't necessarily think about all of that. And so it's taken a long time for me to understand that the interpretation piece is actually a huge component of my job.